Welcome to the Generational Awakening YouTube channel. Our aim is to encourage, equip, and empower Christian leaders and parents to effectively nurture the next generation, become resilient, lifelong disciples of Jesus. Today, we welcome our special guest, Ray.Popham. Ray serves through the avenues of leadership, speaking, training, coaching, mentoring, and shepherding. He is an international speaker, teacher, businessman, pastor, and coach whose personal work has directly reached into 87 nations. He brings leadership experience from the military, healthcare, business, civic, nonprofit, and ministry realms. Driven by his passion, faith, and a heart to serve, Ray's message and work is to inspire and empower others to be good at what they do and great at who they are. His time and leadership gifts are currently shared as a global speaker and trainer in the business, ministry, and educational worlds, as owner of 2 businesses, and as founder of 2 nonprofits. He is the developer of the Pro for Life Transformation program. He serves in the John Maxwell Enterprise as faculty president of the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team and Deputy Director of Global Programs for Equip, leading the global Beyond Success transformational leadership movement. He lives in Aiken, South Carolina, with his wife, Teresa, 2 grown children and their spouses, 6 grand princesses, and 1 grand prince. Hi, Ray. It's great to have you with us today. It sounds like life is pretty busy for you.
Yes, Harry, it's great to be with you today. Life is busy for me, but that's the way I like it. I say I live full and I'm going to die finished.
Well, it's wonderful. You have already so many princesses and a prince to really equip as the next generation as well, beyond the generation of your own children that you've already effectively equipped.
Yeah. One of the greatest things I set out as a young man, I said, more than anything, I wanted to be a father and I wanted to be a grandfather. And that's always been like a #1 priority next to being a faithful son of God. And I've just always wanted that, always wanted to do that, and always wanted to be that. And so I'm getting to live that out, which is pretty awesome.
Yes, it's wonderful indeed. And I share those aspirations as well. So for the moment, I'm a father of 2 adult children who are both married, but no grandchildren yet. So all in good time.
Yes.
All in good time.
It's a great experience. It opens up a whole new place in your heart and a whole new place in your life.
Indeed. Well, I'm really looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Well, could you begin by first telling us, what do you think is the biggest challenge to church growth in the present age?
Well, I think there's so many components to that, but I think one of the things is that we live in a increasingly secularized world and society, and many times the ideas, the values, the way of living out life in a secularized approach is very different than a biblical worldview. Many of the nations, particularly in the Western culture, that they were influenced by Christianity, and therefore it affected our laws. It affected the way we looked at family and life. It affected the way we looked at society and interaction. It affected our laws. It affected everything. But more and more, we're seeing just the secularization of our society, and so it's moving away from a biblical worldview that centers on how does God see it, what is God's wisdom on it, and then living out that wisdom, to man from the inside, internally kind of deciding, what's right, what's wrong, what's the approach, what's not the approach. I think that, coupled with the fact that even people in our world that profess Christianity, we're seeing an increasingly number of those who are not part of a faith family. They're not attending a worship gathering on a regular basis, any type of interaction with people of faith. And so while they may adhere to what they believe to be certain values, on a day-to-day basis, that's not what is informing how they're living or how they're interacting. And so it's just those two together, to me, are just huge components as to what we see right now affecting our world. And it's our biggest challenge to church growth, because Jesus said, they'll know us by their love, and they'll know us by our obedience to Christ as disciples, followers living that out. And so I don't think that the world is getting to see that the way they need to. And so there's nothing drawing them to the church. There's nothing drawing them to Christ. And in the end, isn't that what produces church growth?
Indeed, indeed. Well, why do you see personal growth development in the area of faith and leadership, having strong values? Why do you see that as important in the transformation of our communities and our nations?
So it goes back to what I just said a minute ago, is that as secularization sets more and more the tone for all of the dimensions of life versus scripture and a biblical worldview, one of the things that it hugely affects is our values, what it is we value and the way we live that out. And so the importance of personal growth, learning those values, leaning into those values, and then leading with those values is, it's huge, because if you're not intentional about that, and there's not intentional programs for that, then it's just not going to happen. My spiritual father and mentor, Dr. John Maxwell, and also he was the founder of Equip. He says that the only way to guarantee that tomorrow's going to get better is through intentional growth. And so if values lived out, so think about it this way. Jesus gave us an answer for the world. He told his disciples, we call this the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not only a foundational principle for Christianity. You'll find that in every major religion of the world. Every culture has some form of that. So do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. That's okay as long as your values are good. But if your values aren't good, then you're gonna be doing to other people things that are not from a value-based way of living. And I think that most of the problems that are in the world today, most of the problems we experience in society, in the family, in the church, with laws and everything else, is related to values. We just do not live good values. And the reason increasingly people aren't living good values is because I don't think they're learning good values. There's not conversations around good values and what those look like. And so I think that because the problem with most deterioration in our society is the deterioration of values, and because of most of the benefits and the things that are good for life, good for our family, good for the society, are because people live good values, I believe we have to be more intentional, not only ourselves, but we have to be more intentional about helping others just go back to the simple things, the things that we learned, many of us learned growing up, which were just what are good values and how do you live those out? And then, how do you live those good values in a way that adds value to other people and does to others what you would have them to do unto yourself?
Yes, indeed. And certainly we can see the impact that that's having on the next generation and the values that they are following. And
absolutely,
a lot of the problems in society, a lot of the suffering and anxiety that young people are experiencing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see is because we're not having those conversations anymore. Many of those conversations of values were directly related to scripture, directly related to a Christian worldview. Well, as society pulls out Christian influence, one of the things that it pulled out is it pulled out then the conversation related to values. So we're teaching our young people a lot of things maybe, but we're not necessarily teaching them values. And we're assuming maybe that they know these. But if they're not learning these intentionally, if it's not a part of the curriculum in education, if it's not conversations that are being had at home, if young people aren't in faith settings where those are being talked about, then they just simply develop their own set of values that maybe kind of proceed from what they want or their feelings or their ideas. And that begins to hugely affect the way people live, the way people interact, what they say to one another, how they think about one another, and how they act. And then that flows over into every other area of society. Sometimes when I talk to people, they say, well, I don't, when you talk about values, you talk about simple things. I mean, people should know this. How are those going to change the world or affect the world? And I use this as an example. Let's take the value of listening, learning to listen. So the scripture says, be slow to anger, be slow to speak, be swift to hear. Okay. So that's a biblical value, but that value lived out in a practical, relevant message way is listening. People say, well, how's that going to change the world? We need something bigger. We need something more massive to transform our world. So I say this, think of how many world wars could have been stopped if two people would have intentionally practiced the value of listening. Sincerely trying to listen to one another. What is one another feeling? What is one another saying? Think of how many wars would have been started. Think of how many families could have been saved. How many marriages would have been saved if two people would have practiced intentionally the value of listening, if it had been a core value. Think of how many parents and their children and their relationships could have turned out so much differently if they had practiced the value of listening. Think of politics, how different it would be in our world if 2 parties, 3 parties could sit down and intentionally practice the value of listening, to say, I genuinely want to value you, value what you're feeling, value what you're trying to say, so that I can better understand it. And so when I talk about values, or when we talk about values organizationally, that's what we're talking about. And we're assuming that everybody is learning that. We're assuming that our young people are learning that. But I'm finding more and more, Harry, that's not happening. That's not a part of the educational system. It's not happening in families. It's not happening among friends. The conversation to learn and live good values, it's just not happening, and we're assuming it is.
Yes, and certainly I've also observed that more and more, and certainly affecting the way in which young people perceive themselves, the way they perceive family, the way they perceive others, the way they perceive the church. And in that respect, what do you think are the contributing factors why so many young people today are leaving the church as they become adults?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. One of them is that I think in the church, we many times we lack a relevant message that is applicable to people's lives. In other words, being able to take the principles and be able to help people understand what that principle scripturally, or that principle of Christ, looks like lived out in our life, and what are the benefits when we do that. In other words, what is the value that happens in our life? There was a reason that God gave us these principles based on his wisdom. And what does that look like lived out in our culture, this generation, our age, the tools we have, the resources we have, all of that. And so I think many times in my conversations with young people is that they don't see the relevancy of the message. And so I kind of correlate it to this when I train and teach church leaders, is that, while it's great that we have Paul's 3 missionary journeys, most people are just trying to figure out their own journey through next week. And through their life. And so we have to be able to help them be able to do that. And a relevant message means what is foremost in their mind, what is foremost in their thoughts and in their pursuits. I think that was the power of what Jesus did. I think it's the powerful and approach that Paul shared when he writes 1 Corinthians, that he said, I entered their world so that I could better understand them, and so that I could be all things to all men. In other words, that I could really understand and be relevant to them. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing goes back to what I said at the onset. It's the secularization of our culture, that many young people are drawing what they feel to be important from culture. And because culture is increasingly secularized, it sends messages all over the place that for instance, that there's no absolute truth. And so I have, sometimes young people tell me, well, there's, it's relative. There's no absolute truth. And I'm like, do you really believe that? You believe that there's no such thing as an absolute truth? And they're like, yeah, I don't believe there's an absolute truth. And I said, well, you realize what you just did was establish an absolute truth, that there is no absolute truth. You've determined that there's this truth absolutely, that there's no such thing as absolute truth. You've actually just done what it is that you say you don't believe in. So now let's talk about that. Where did that thought come from? Where did that assumption that you have that now you're going to lead your life, where did that come from? And so many times it's the secularization of culture. They heard that. It sounded cool. It sounded inclusive. And so they adopted that without any foundation or any basis of that. And so I believe those are big things, along with the assumption. I think that we just assume that young people from somewhere are picking up and adopting the right kind of values. And I just don't believe that's true, because we're not being intentional.
Yes, indeed. And so many of society and the culture, they're already outside of the church context, and they're separated from the source of truth and the values that form really the foundation of our societies. And again, our young people, they're increasingly just trying to make their own way outside of a church community, and without really having that personal relationship with God. So as things stand, what can we do to reach those who may never come to a church?
Yeah, I think the first thing is a sober awareness of what's really going on out there. A sober awareness is that, for instance, here in America, 53% of people in America are never going to go to church statistically. They're never going to go to church, which means this: if everything that we have to share, or that we're trying to share, that we're trying to reach people, is dependent upon a church gathering or a church event, we're not going to reach the unreached. We're just not, because they're not there. Seeker-friendly service is great as long as seekers are there. If seekers are not there, which 53% of them never are going to come, I don't care how seeker-friendly you make your service, then that means we're not going to reach them. If evangelism continues to be an event instead of a relationship, here's what we know: they're not coming to our events. And because they're not coming to our events, no matter how cool they are, how slick they are, we're not reaching them. And so I think that's what we have to understand, is that there is one lost sheep out there, and someone has to be willing to leave the 99 to go to that one sheep. And so we have to develop relationships outside of the church and the church setting and events so that we can build relationships with people and be able to be salt and light to them, use influence, in other words, as Jesus taught us to do. I think the other thing is we can't just tell people to do that. We've got to be able to empower them and equip them with tools, approaches, strategies on how to do that and to be able to do that. So we can't just, preach a message that says we need to do this. We have to be able to mobilize them, equip them, give them tools, and help them understand how to be able to do that. So to do that in a way that's relevant, that genuinely adds value to people. I think one of the problems we have in our church world is you look at those 53% that are out there, for instance, in America, and then we're going to look at some UK stats here and some Europe stats, is that many of them view the church as wanting something from me, not trying to give something to me. And so that's huge. So for instance, let's talk about young people, because I know that's what you're focusing on, and I appreciate that so much. That's the now and the future. So graphically, you can see here on the screen, 70% of young people in the UK identify with no religion whatsoever, which means they have no spiritual influence or direction related to the values they adopt and how they'll live. And so, you can just look down, through in Europe there. So look at, UK, it's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth one down there on that first graphic. That's huge. Even of those that do in the UK are adherents to their religion, many of them, as we know, are not evangelical, they're Catholic. But the reality is, statistically, 60% of Catholics in the UK were not born in the UK. So that actually tweaks the numbers there, especially when it comes to our young people being raised with those values. And then, of course, you can see down through there, that next graphic, 59% of people in the UK never attend religious services. So, you can look down again through there. It's all of Europe. That's huge. But look at the UK. Over half of people are never attending a worship gathering. That means they're not coming to hear our message. What are we going to do with people who never come to church? How are we going to help them? How are we going to influence them and impact them? So, I wrote a statistic down, even of the Christians, people that are Christians there in Europe, only 18 to 22% of them are attending service every week on a regular basis, or in a month, actually, I should say, have attended a worship gathering in a month. So of those that are believing in Christian values, let's just say only 1/5 of them are in a worship gathering in Europe on any given month. And so how does that affect our life? Well, look at the last graph. Nearly 2/3 of young people in the UK say they never pray. They never pray. Prayer that's a foundational element to our faith. And so let's talk about faith, hope, love, connection to God. I define prayer as developing and maintaining oneness with God, based on John 17 and what Jesus taught the disciples, that the reason we pray is not to get something. The reason we pray is to keep our connection, our oneness with the Lord. That's how we maintain our oneness, is through prayer. So look at the effect on 16 to 29-year-olds. That's huge. That their prayer is not a regular part of their day-to-day life. I had wrote down a statistic here in some notes that I pulled up about some general stats. 11%, only 11% of people in Europe, only 11% of them say that Christianity plays an important role in their life. 1 in 10. Only 1 in 10 say that it plays an important role. So what is the other 90? Where's the other 90% coming from that plays a role in their life? It's coming from secularization. It's coming from humanism. So I think what we can do to evangelize in the present age is, first, we've got to get a real awareness here. I mean, we've got to wake up. We've got to wake up and say, people aren't coming to church. They're not looking in the church. Now, we can either curse the darkness, make all the excuses, tell all the reason why that is, or we can do what Leonard Ravenhill said. Instead of cursing the darkness, we can turn on the light. And I think what we have to do is turn on the light and figure out, how do we take the gospel and the values of Christ, how do we take those outside the church setting to people, and instead of them thinking we're trying to get something from them, instead we give something to them, which is we add value to their life. That's salt and light, is what we believe. It's salt. John Maxwell says salt makes things better, light makes things brighter. So what we do is lead with salt and then bring the light. So in other words, we bring to them things that are going to make their life better. And we, when they learn about values, when they connect to values, it's going to make their life better. And when we can do that within a relevant message and within a context of relationships, I believe then we have something to evangelize and influence our present age. But if we're just trying to figure out, how do we tweak the worship gathering? How do we create another event? We're going to miss it, because the vast majority of those that we're trying to reach are never, ever going to come to our church.
Yes, indeed. Well, I know that Beyond Success is a roundtable approach to really share about values, is one of the key ways that is being proposed by Equip. Can you just share a little bit about what that consists of, and then how can people find out more and really get involved?
Sure. So in Equip, we looked at, we're a leadership organization, as the Maxwell is a leadership organization. So we looked at, we want to reach people with faith, and we want to do it within the context of our calling or our message, which is leadership. So we begin to think of not the 99 that the church has great programs for and is working on, but we begin to think about the one lost sheep that's out there. The one lost sheep that's out there, we begin to think, what is the relevant message? If they're not seeking after God, what is it they're seeking after? If their energy is not in the pursuit of God and faith and values, what is it that they're investing their time and their energy and their money in? And we determined that it is success. They're all going after success. They're reading books on success. They're going to seminars about success. They're looking, how do I be successful? How do I have a successful family, a successful business, future? So we decided that God had showed us that that's our relevant message. It's the message of success. And so what we did is say, okay, how can we add value by bringing in the conversation of values and be salt? How can we just make their life better and help them be better at what they're trying to pursue, build a relationship in hopes that in building that relationship, now we have the right to talk to them about our faith. And so then we can bring in the light. And so we determined and looked at, what are the values that if people lived and practiced, what are the values that would help them be more successful in their life? And so we adopted some values that we would teach on and help people create conversations around. And so those are values of attitude, personal growth, the importance of personal growth, priorities, that successful people know how to determine and manage good priorities. They manage priorities more than they manage time. Number 4, relationships, that you have to have the right kind of relationships in your life. I have a little saying that say people are either a wind in your sail or an anchor on your tail. And so relationships are important. And then we believe that we have a session number 5 called My Most Important Relationship. In this relationship, John Maxwell talks about the importance of his success and the role that his relationship with God plays in that it was the key contributing factor. And so he talked to them about what a relationship with God looks like and what it doesn't look like. He teaches on the 4 pictures of God, and that 3 pictures are man-created pictures of what it is to have a relationship with God, and those are not what God taught us. And then he teaches the 4th picture is how what God said is a relationship, and that he's the door, Jesus is the door, he's the gate, he's the way, and that God is standing at the door knocking, and that he wants to be a part of your life, wants to be a part of your success, and you can invite him in and start a personal relationship. And then that table, that transformation table, round table methodology is a conversation then about the role of faith in our success. And people have the opportunity in that table to start pray a prayer, start a relationship with God, and begin a relationship with Jesus. And then the 6th and the 7th are really focused on living out these values in your life, good intentions to good actions. And then in the 7th session, we talk about, success is great and we're pursuing that, but there's something that's even better than success. It's called significance. And so we talk about what does a life of significance look like that is even better than a life of success. And so the way we do that, and you'll see that on this next slide, is we have a guided journey that a facilitator, someone that we train and then we equip with the materials. We do our training for free. We give away all of our materials for free to facilitators who will use it. There's a roundtable discussion where they read together, they reflect in a conversation with one another around a table, and then they choose one action step that they're going to take that week that's going to move them in the direction of where they're wanting to go and better living out that value in their life. For instance, table 1 is on attitude. And so they really talk about, what is my attitude right now? What are the benefits of having a better attitude? And what is the thing I could do right now that could change my attitude and make it better? Each one of these, you'll see on the next slide, each one of these, there's a video by John Maxwell that's at the beginning where he talks and he teaches on that value based on his years of experience. And he connects to people in relationship and kind of sets it up for the conversation that can happen in that transformation table. And so this is an example. This is not the tool, but this is a tool that we developed that says we can empower people to take a conversation outside the church setting into the setting where people are and add some type of true value to their life, be salt to their life. Now, this works well for all people, but it really works well for business people or success-minded people, millennials, college students, business people, entrepreneurs, people that are trying to start their life over or build their future life, because these are conversations that are relevant to them. They're reading about, they're trying to learn about, they're trying to understand. And we believe that when people live these values, learn these values, they'll live these values. When they live these values, they'll lead with these values. And living and leading in our culture with values like this, it will transform. It'll transform our world. And so that's the primary tool that we use in Equip. So we train pastors to be able to train their church and mobilize this and give this as a tool to their people, so that these pastors or faith leaders, leaders of evangelistic movements, will have a tool that they can equip people with and take to the one lost sheep. We take faith leaders, people that are in business or education or any of the other realms of influence, that want a tool they can use, and we take them through the journey, then train them how to be a facilitator, and then provide them with the materials so that they can use those over and over again to impact others and to train others to use and keep reproducing and multiplying. And then they can all continue to be a part of this transformational leadership movement that's going on around the world. So in a nutshell, that's basically it. What we do is we offer the opportunity. The starting point for people is take the journey yourself. And so they can connect to you, Harry, and find out more. They can connect to us. They can go to iequip.org. There's an opportunity there for them to see information and get signed up for an upcoming journey. It's a 7-session journey that they can go through with us, and then they can see maybe if this is a tool, and then we'll train them as a facilitator if they're a believer and they can use this. So that's what we're on. That's the mission of what we're doing in our Salt and Light initiative.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ray. We're just having you with us and just giving us some more of the insight, understanding the need, but understanding that this is a really effective way of going out into the wider community and connecting with people with issues that they're concerned about, and being able to start those conversations off based on values.
Absolutely. And it's also a great tool, Harry, for families to use, right? To have a conversation, with their children and amongst themselves of these values. And then even after those 7 sessions, they can have continued conversations about values, and there's other materials and resources for that. But it's a great tool for them to just kind of start in their own family and in their own home, and have an opportunity that says we're going to grow together as a family because we're going to be doing it together. We're going to be talking about values, which we want to teach our children. We're all going to have the conversation about faith and our relationship with the Lord. And then we're also going to be equipped with something that later can be used with our friends, with other people, so that we can influence them. And so it's a great tool for families or organizations working with families or trying to help families or trying to help young people.
Absolutely. And I know that there's also a format where the same values-based material is being used by school groups.
Yes.
Where it's the young people themselves who are facilitating and really discovering a lot of these core values and experiencing transformation. And
absolutely.
We
have
people.
Programs with called iLead, a 3-year curriculum, that school is student driven, and schools can use. We're doing that all over the world. Change Your World is continued teaching on values, different kinds of values, so that somebody could continue to have conversations after Beyond Success. Just for instance, in Beyond Success, Harry, from January until the end of June, and we're just scratching the surface. We're only in about 30 different nations right now where we've started programs using Beyond Success. And we've seen over 109,000 people make a commitment to Jesus in these tables, not in church, in a table with a fellow believer. And this year, we're going to see 250,000 people that are going to give their heart to the Lord in these tables.
Well, I really encourage folk to go to the website. You have the information below with Ray's contact details, and also the details to contact Kay.waters, who is the program coordinator and operations for the whole global program of the Beyond Success Global Initiative. So there's a lot to discover, but that's where you'll find out more, and you get the information below. And so check it out. And really, I can't recommend it highly enough, because I've also experienced the roundtable and the values and the impact it has on our thinking. And when you can experience that as a family, then it's amazing how God can use that in our lives.
Amen.
Well, the Generational Awakening is not just a YouTube channel. It's also a book that I'm writing. And you can visit thegenerationalawakening.com to find out more and sign up to get some free resources and a free copy of the book to review once it's published. The book and the YouTube channel aim to encourage, equip, and empower pastors, parents, and practitioners, those working with youth and children, so that they can effectively nurture the next generation in their faith. If you find value in what we have shared today, I invite you to like this video and to hit the subscribe button so that you'll be informed of every new video released. And then share the link with other friends and communities who would also be helped and inspired. So together, let's impact many more lives for good across all the nations. Well, thank you again, Ray. Thank you once again for just the great work that Equip is doing and for just the making these resources available. And I really encourage everyone to check out the resources, sign up to just experience yourself the actual roundtable. And then you'll be amazed at just the ways that God can inspire us to use that in our families, in our local churches, in our organizations, in our work situations with colleagues. And, there's just an amazing field of possibilities. So I really encourage you to find out more and to get engaged. And in future interviews, we will be finding out more about, as Ray mentioned, the Change Your World, which is another strategy. And then we'll look a bit more deeply into the content of that and how it's impacting youth in schools and can be available for you as well. So until the next time, be blessed. Thank you again, Ray. Thank you again, Kay, for all the great work you're doing. And together, let's all multiply the blessing around us. So until the next time, be blessed and keep multiplying the blessing. Thank you.